Charles Leclerc causes Monza pandemonium after winning the Italian Grand Prix as McLaren realise too late it's finally time for team orders. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding and I am joined by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, we said it was going to be an Italian Grand Prix not to miss. That was absolutely bang on the money. Charles Leclerc surprising everyone, or Ferrari, should I say, surprising pretty much every team in the paddock with a surprise one-stop strategy. It was looking like it was going to be a McLaren 1-2. That was not the case. Charles Leclerc from fourth on the grid, victory in Monza.
I did say yesterday that the surprise of this Grand Prix was going to be the fact, and I say yesterday, I'm referring to Saturday, just in case anybody picks this up on a Monday, the surprise of this Grand Prix was that we were going to see a lot of two-stop strategies. That whereas in the past, Monza was a nailed-on one-stopper simply because of the length of time taken in the pit stop. However, on this occasion, with this brand new circuit, this new asphalt, it's caused over the three practice sessions, a lot of graining for a number of cars. And that's exactly what we saw happen during Sunday's Grand Prix. The fact that there was a lot of graining. The McLaren duo, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, had to two-stop. Lando in particular, and we're going to get onto this later on a little bit, folks. Lando in particular, a lot of graining to the left front. That really forced him into that two-stop. Charles Leclerc, however, Charles Leclerc and Ferrari pulled off quite the masterstroke. They got their tyres to work, although obviously Charles was being reeled in at a rate of knots towards the end. We got to feel that another couple of laps and Oscar Piastri might have got him. But as it was, great strategy from Ferrari. They got things to work with their tyres. And Charles Leclerc, as you say, you could have used a bit of alliteration, Monza madness rather than Monza pandemonium.
Monza man,
literally, this was one of those results, just like Lewis and Silverstone just a few weeks back. This was one of those results where the whole circuit went absolutely bananas. The Tifosi got their wish. They've seen one of their heroes win in red today, and that was Charles Leclerc. And unfortunately for Carlos Sainz, birthday boy, 30th birthday today. Not quite the present he was hoping for, but nevertheless, he did play a part, and we will get on to that very shortly again.
Well, it was spine-tingling, goosebump stuff, seeing obviously Leclerc for the roar from the Tifosi was something just extraordinary. You don't really get anywhere else in the world. Maybe Silverstone.
Always very special, Ben. Always very special.
It was, and the scenes in the start-finish straight were insane. Yeah. The scenes which were also insane was the opening lap at turns 4 and 5 between Lando Norris, who started on pole and is still, yet again, did not end up leading the first lap after being on pole. He just seems to have some bad luck with the first lap after starting on pole. But turn 4 and 5, Lando and Oscar Piastri. Piastri with quite an audacious overtake on Lando, which is fair to say caught Lando by surprise. And two words that were trending during the race: Papaya rules.
Papaya rules. From my question on Saturday post-qualifying to Andrea, when I asked him, you've got your guys on the front row, you've not had generally good starts in the past, but if you get those good starts on this occasion, what's the team instruction going to be for those guys going through the first chicane, second chicane? And Andrea turned around and said, we have the fire rules whereby you take obvious care if you're going up against another driver in another team. However, if it's somebody in papaya, you take even extra more care to absolutely quote unquote him, even extra more care. They got for the first chicane, not the second, however, nearly not the second. They very nearly touched. Looked like there's a little bit of a touch, certainly, that managed to get Lando a little bit out of sync. And of course, what happened, that particular incident, had a huge knock-on effect because, of course, Lando, trying to come out of the second chicane, trying to get his car straightened up, having been surprised by Oscar's manoeuvre, allowed Charles Leclerc to sweep through. Very good point here that you mentioned, Nick, that was made by Nico Rosberg in his Sky Sports F1 punditry, whereby he said if McLaren had been able to hold that 1-2 station, regardless of whether it was Oscar in front of Norris, Norris in front of Oscar, then more than likely Charles would have had greater difficulty trying to get past both McLarens to take the win. So they kind of tripped over one another. We know they did because they only got the 2-3 and not the 1-2 that they would most definitely have expected, having started on the front row of the grid and given the pace of that car in particular.
And of course, in the end, it was Oscar who finished second, Lando in third. He did also get the fastest lap, so Lando is now 62 points behind Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. McLaren are only 8 behind Red Bull. But we said after qualifying, we discussed team orders, and it feels like now McLaren has realised it needs them. But unfortunately, on a weekend where it did have the best car, it realised too late.
Yeah, Andrea, once again, as you can imagine, grilled on this particular topic. He has now turned around and said that with regards to that overtake, with regards to Oscar getting Lando out of shape with that move, there is now going to be a review of the papaya rules and, if necessary, a reinforcement of those regulations. In particular, and this is the crucial point for everyone, and it was something that had also played into this weekend as well. Now, however, with Lando being in the better position to challenge Max Verstappen for the driver's title, with McLaren recognising that their car is head and shoulders above Red Bull's problematic, difficult to drive, undrivable, said Max Verstappen. Again, we're going to get onto that in a minute. Bearing in mind that the McLaren is head and shoulders above the Red Bull now, that McLaren has both titles within its potential grasp. Certainly the constructors, that looks like it's definitely going to go to McLaren at this particular rate. 8 points, that is nothing now. Just to give people some idea, Red Bull has led the Constructors' Championship since the 2022 Spanish Grand Prix. They have never been headed across 57 races it is now going into the next Grand Prix in Azerbaijan, where they could now well be overtaken. Max Verstappen, of course, his lead 62 points. It is dwindling. It could have been a hell of a lot worse for Max. Charles and Oscar have done him a little bit of a favour. Lando did get the point for the fastest lap on the last lap, which has allowed him to take a further 8 points out of Max's lead. But yes, Andrea Stella has now confirmed that Lando is going to be prioritised in the Grand Prix, the 8 remaining Grand Prix going forward. They see him as their best chance to clinch this driver's title, because as Andrea put it at the very end, when I asked him, I said, well, how's Oscar going to take this? You've got to remember, F1, at the end of the day, whilst we predominantly always remember who was a driver's champion from a particular year, it is, of course, a team game. It's not just about the 2 drivers, it's about the 1,000-odd employees behind Red Bull, behind McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, etc. You have to do it for them. And if McLaren feels it can win both championships, as Andrea made clear that he feels now they can, they are going to now start to prioritise Lando Norris over Oscar Piastri. And Oscar will just have to accept that for the betterment of the entire team, not just for himself as a driver.
And Red Bull now know, Christian Horner admitted himself, that they have a fight. They need to do everything they can to discover what is going wrong with the RB20. Max Verstappen could only salvage P6, Sergio Perez 8th. Red Bull tried an alternative strategy, starting on the hard tyres, those around them on the mediums. It looked good at the start, but the graining was just too severe on the hard compound tyres for the Red Bulls. And ultimately, this is now, we were saying after qualifying, it was a serious problem. It's even more than that. Even Dr. Helmut Marko, Christian Horner have been addressing it as a serious problem, a huge problem. Red Bull has 8 races to try and survive a fight against McLaren with what is now a car which cannot compete for podiums.
If just referring, I'm going to refer now to Max Verstappen's comments in the pen, because the driver's pen, post-race. And he basically described the car as undrivable. Most in particular, he said that it was a monster that they had turned what was the most dominant car in F1 history, you think what he achieved in 2023, into a monster, quote unquote, that the car now had to be turned upside down to try and get to the bottom of these problems. But more crucially for Max, when asked whether he felt the Constructors' title was going to be hard to retain now, he turned around and said, both titles are not realistic given the car in its current state. He's worried now that he's not going to become a 4-time champion. Max could not have put it any more bluntly. I've never heard him speak so pointedly about his problems with a car over all the time that he has been in F1 than he did in that post-race pen after the Italian Grand Prix. Quite pointed, very strong. Christian Horner has made clear that it's an aero problem as well now as what is a fundamentally flawed balance issue with that car. Max said the balance is all over the place. Basically, there is a complete disconnect between the front of the car and the back of the car. And no matter which area Red Bull trying to address, it then throws the opposite out of kilter. They cannot get a handle on trying to cure the ills of the car in its entirety. It seems, as I say, they do one thing, it affects something else. They try something else, that affects then another part of the car. This is huge for Red Bull. They've gone from, as Max put it, being the most dominant team, having the most dominant car, to only being today the 4th quickest in the Italian Grand Prix. And as Max put it, with both titles most definitely now on the line. They are under pressure. And at this stage, yes, the Constructors' Championship is definitely looking unrealistic. And Max, as far as he's concerned, feels that retaining his driver's title now is also not realistic. Still that 62-point gap. There's still 8 Grand Prix. There's still 3 sprints. There are big chunks of time coming up now between the blocks of races that we have. We've got a week and a half now till we have the Azerbaijan-Singapore doubleheader. They could be really problematic. 2 street circuits for Red Bull. And we only got to remember what happened at Red Bull in Singapore last year. Then we have a 3.5 week gap to the triple header in the Americas. Then we have another 2.5 week gap to the Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi end of season triple header. So they do have these big windows to try and get on top of the problems. But clock is ticking. It's a race against time. The titles are on the line. It's not looking good for Red Bull, that's for sure, right now.
And as you pointed out, in the short term, they have got coming up now in a week and a half, possibly one of the trickiest, I think, doubleheaders in the history of F1, Azerbaijan and then Singapore, 2 circuits which we know are difficult on both car and driver, particularly in Singapore. But let's discuss Mercedes, because Red Bull we will discuss heavily in the podcast on Monday. Mercedes, a bit of an odd race. Lewis Hamilton in 5th, George Russell in 7th after having to pit for a new front wing following a pretty shocking start for George, it's fair to say. Went through the runoff at the first chicane, then made contact with one of the Red Bulls at turn 5. A difficult day for Mercedes. It seemed to just didn't quite have the pace to compete with Ferrari and McLaren.
Yeah, they've had a difficult couple of back-to-back races since we've returned from the summer break. As we know, everything was all rosy in their particular garden going into that summer break. They were on a high, they were winning Grand Prix again, on the podium, great run, and all of a sudden it's just gone a little bit flat for them. Zandvoort and here in Monza. They've got time. They know that they've got a good car. They saw that pre-summer break, as I've just mentioned. They know they've got the real good basics there of a good, solid, race-winning, podium-contending or podium-clinching car. Poles as well that we've seen as well from the W15. So it's just about now getting back on top of those issues, because yes, there are a few little things that they know they can do right. George did really well, I thought, in qualifying on Saturday to get 3rd position. And of course, it all went a little bit horribly wrong for him in that first chicane. Broke the front wing end plate, and that really was his race, not run, but it made it hellishly more complicated, because ultimately he was losing a lot of time, a lot of downforce, had to pick for a new front wing, and that really heavily compromised him. So he did quite well to get back to the position in which he finished. As for Lewis Hamilton, relatively anonymous kind of weekend. Wasn't happy with how his qualifying went. He's not been happy with many of his qualifyings all season long, in fairness to him. And this was just one of those days where he was secondary to everything else going on around him. Charles winning, the tussle with the McLarens, the Red Bull woes. It was just almost like, yeah, Norris, Lewis, nondescript. Here he is. He's crossed the line. Oh, he was there. Oh well, well done, Lewis. We got to the end at least, so.
And just to quickly go through the top 10 from today before we get on to our final and quite, well, intriguing talking point. Obviously, Charles Leclerc was victorious with Piastri and Norris completing the podium. Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton in 4th and 5th. Verstappen 6th, Russell 7th, Perez in 8th, Alex Albon in a superb P9, Kevin Magnussen P10, and rookie Franco Colapinto in a brilliant P12 for his first F1 race. But
Dan, I just got that one absolutely spot on, Nick, in my bold predictions. I did say, I actually got the podium right as well. The top three, the three drivers on the podium, just the wrong order. I had Lando, Oscar, Charles. It was just flipped. Never mind. But I didn't do too bad. I got Franco Colapinto.
You did well.
Exactly spot on.
I certainly did not get my bold predictions correct. But let's end off with Kevin Magnussen, who got a point today, but unfortunately also got 2 penalty points for a collision with Pierre Gasly, which means he has a 1-race ban and will not be racing in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. It's a disaster for K-Mag, who it's fair to say was not pleased afterwards.
We actually spoke to him in the pen just before the official documents on the SIA came through. However, we were able to ask him enough about the likelihood that, given it was a 10-second penalty for causing a collision, that was more than they're likely going to incur these 2 penalty points that took him up to that 12-point threshold, and has, in the FIA parlance, forced them to suspend his super license for a race. But of course, we look at it as a 1-race ban. Of course, we can now expect Oliver Behrman to be in that car for Haas at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time. Be a real major surprise if he isn't, bearing in mind Ollie's going to be with the team for next season going forward. So, as I say, fully expect Ollie. Kevin, though, yes, just to get back to him, as you can appreciate, not happy. And I'm actually going to refer more to Pierre Gasly's comments more than Kevin's, because I asked Pierre specifically, do you feel that, he was actually taken quite by surprise, because when he appeared in pen, we then just got the FIA document. He could not believe that, firstly, that Kevin got a 10-second penalty for what he said was nothing. Neither car, okay, they took each other off the circuit, but neither car was damaged. It didn't damage either of their races, so why 10 seconds for that particular penalty? And he was even more dismayed at the fact that that incident had then incurred the additional 2 points that has now meant that Kevin has got this race ban. I asked him specifically, do you feel that you could go to the stewards and just make the case, bear in mind that you're quite almost incredulous that Kevin's got a penalty for what was a nothing incident? And he did actually turn around and say, hand on heart, that he was going to go speak to them. Now, whether he's managed to do that, I don't know. Bottom line is, even if he did, it's going to make Apple, it will make no odds, or has made no odds, whether he's had that opportunity to go and say hello to Johnny Herbert, who was the primary driver steward here, of course, this weekend at Monza. It's really unfortunate for Kevin. And it's one of those situations as well where perhaps now that this ban has actually taken place, something that's been hanging over in Kevin's head for quite some time, that going forward, does it give the FIA the opportunity to review their rules and regulations? Because Fernando Alonso was very strong in the post-race pen. He said it before, and he reiterated the fact that penalty points should only be given for very serious / dangerous infractions of the rules. This was not a dangerous or serious infraction of the rules. Yes, there was a minor coming together. As I say, they went off the circuit, no damage caused, they carried on their races, and Kevin even got a point out of it. He got a point, but also got another 2 points that has taken him out of the next race. So a real mixed bag for Kevin Magnussen. As you can imagine, really downhearted, really disheartened, far from happy with the stewards because he pointed to the fact that Daniel Ricciardo took out effectively his team, Kevin's teammate, Nico Hulkenberg, on lap one, ruined Nico's race, got a 5-second penalty. So how does he end up with, and one penalty point, one driver's penalty point just for it. So how did he end up with 10 seconds and the 2 points for what was a far less serious incident? Zero consistency with those two particular incidents in particular. And Kevin, as I say, just really dismayed. How he's probably feeling right now, knowing that he's not going to be in Baku, is anybody's guess.
Absolutely. And that consistency point we will discuss, obviously, in more detail in the podcast, because it is a fascinating point given it was only a 5-second time penalty for Ricciardo. For those who have watched this video, be sure to let us know your thoughts on anything we have discussed. Ian, as always, amazing stuff. Get yourself home safely. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com F1 update. Be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you on Monday for our podcast. See you later.
And if you're there, folks, drop some questions on the back of this. If
Absolutely.
You're watching this episode, put some questions in the chat below, and hopefully we can address them in the podcast as well on Monday. Thanks ever so much for that, and as always, take care.
See you later.